Hello guys, and this is Zapped from Graphic Artist Studios, and today we're going to learn about all the adjustments, or at least most of the adjustments for photo editing and retouching in Photoshop. Now, the first thing you guys need to know is where they are. So, if you're like very experienced with Photoshop, this might be not a tutorial for you, but I would recommend watching it just in case you learn something. So, anyways, there are, I believe, three locations they're located. So pretty much the first one is if you bring in an image right here, which is I have a Lamborghini or something. Couldn't find anything, so I was like, let's get this. But anyways, the first location is first you have to select a layer, then go up to Image, Adjustments, and they're all here. Now I'm not going to use these in this tutorial because it's destructive editing. You don't really want to go into destructive editing. You really want to go into like non-destructive editing using adjustment layers, and that's what we're going to use. And the second place you can find the adjustments is on this panel right here. If you do not have it right here, you can go to Window, Adjustments. Now these are displayed in icons, so you can hover over them and it'll tell it in the top left of the small panel. And yeah, so the third place is down here next to these option buttons for creating new layer group and masks and effects and whatnot. And if you click it, here's a whole list of them. Again, it's very similar to going to image adjustments. But we're not going to use the image adjustments where it's non-destructive and it's applying to the image because that's not what you want to do. If you have an older version of Photoshop, such as like very, very old from early 2000s, it's very limited. I recommend upgrading if you do have a very old version, upgrade it to at least CS6. But anyways, let's get started. I'm going to name this empty. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to name this one actually backup. Backup. And I'll keep that one blank. Keep that one blank. And I'll mark this red and just lock it. Alright, so this is the layer we're working on, but we're working with adjustment layers. So you can either go to here or you can go down to here. I'm going to use the icons because I'm familiar with these. I can just read these, but now the first one in the panel is brightness and contrast. So basically that is very simple. Basically you'll adjust the brightness by increasing it, and as you can see when I create, again, I'm jumping back and forth, but before I go over this, when creating an adjustment layer, it does create a separate layer with a mask in case you want to brush over with black on the mask to mask out some parts. But anyways, back to what this does. This basically increases the brightness. You can go all the way up or all the way down. Limit is it's a 300 unit radius, I guess. And put that back to 0. And contrast is just increasing the contrast between the pixels, basically, in color values. Yep. And that's in a 100 unit range. And that's basically it for this. You can also use legacy by checking this, and it will affect all the color values. I believe if you keep it like that, it does preserve the luminancy or something like that. I believe so. But this affects all the pixels. This affects mainly, I believe, the colors and whatnot. Same thing with contrast. Yeah, this affects the luminancy if you have legacy on. But yep, that is basically brightness and contrast. Now I'm going to delete that one because I don't want this palette all confusing. But the next one on the list is levels. This is very similar to curves, but it's an older style per se. People use levels a lot. I actually use curves. I think it's just easier to grasp. But basically, this is a histogram showing all of the pixel data of your image. So it's pretty leveled out except for in the highlights. So basically, if you watch my other tutorial, last tutorial on color cast, I did briefly discuss what this is reading. So this is basically reading your darker values, which are your shadows, and your neutral values, or the grays, or the properly known midtones, right here in the middle. And down here on the right is your highlights, or the lighter areas of your image. And this graph is just telling you all the data right here. Now, what you can do is this is similar to curves, but I think there's a little bit more options or something like that. It's set up differently. So if you just pull this black one over and the white one over towards the center, that basically increases the contrast. If I just do it extremely, it just bumps up the contrast a lot. Now midtones, these are basically brightening the image, and so if you move it towards the highlights, it's basically making everything darker, and if you move it over to the left, it makes it lighter. We're going to set that value to, whoops, I believe it's actually set to 1. Yep. And down here, this is, again, I believe it is your brightness and lightness, and this is affecting everything, basically. You can get different effects with these, and it's very helpful. You can also go into the other channels, such as the reds, and mess with those. If you have some color issues, you can go in here and mess with it with the levels, whatnot. Mess around in there. You can, and you can mess with the blues. This is the RGB document, and there is an option for there's presets in here. You increase contrast. There's different ones, and then light and shadows, lighter. Midtones brighter, midtones darker, and lighter, midtones brighter, midtones darker. Alright, I think that's basically it. I don't know why I was repeating myself. Anyways, I'm going to put this back to default. And now onto the next one is the curves. Now this is very similar, showing the history, and once again, it's, as you can see, it's more stretched out vertically, but it is showing the same data. Now, I don't know if it's showing more information. No. Alright. This is more of a visual, more of a graph type style with a line. So, for example, if I increase this, move this up, it is basically brightening up the image for between the midtones and highlights. If I move it down here between the shadows and shadows and midtones, it does create contrast. So this is a simple S curve, and you can do the opposite way, which is just decreasing the contrast. Now you can, I believe there's a reset button right there, and you can increase contrast and lightness and whatnot through here. You also go through the different channels, such as red, increase the red. That's very simple. If you move it down, it's going to decrease that red. Same thing for the green. Same thing for the blue. That's basically an overview of the curves. There's also an auto option, and there's also presets here. And you can go through here and just mess with these if you like, or you can create your personal one or a custom one, which is preferred. But that's basically the curves. Now the next one is the exposure. If you open this, this is basically your exposure of the image, how much color is exposed, or how I see it more of like a brightness, but it's hard to explain. There is a proper definition. I just can't explain it right now. But it's basically brightening up the image, and it's affecting everything, but in a exposure type way. So if your exposure is very, very high on the camera, there's gonna be a lot of brighter colors or very washed out colors, as in like very bright colors, or bright whites and whatnot. And you don't really want that too much. I mean, you can increase it just a little bit, but you don't really want that much. And the offset is to just it neutralizes the colors, or it just basically messes with the color values and whatnot. I don't use this that often, but may be useful for what you're doing. Depends on when. And the gamma correction is basically just the gamma of the image, or correcting the gamma of the image if it's like offsetted or something like that. But I don't use these options very much, but exposure can be useful in some cases. Now, the next one is vibrance. Basically, if you turn up the saturation, it's gonna pretty much make all these color values from the range that it's at. It's gonna increase all those to not 100%, but 100 in range. So it doesn't increase everything to 100 saturation, 100 saturation. So every pixel's value is the saturation is 100. It does not do that, but you can just keep duplicating it and get very close to that. But that's not reasonable. And the vibrance is a sort of a saturation, but it acts in a different way, as in not affecting everything per se. It's affecting like the more washed out tones, such as the grays and whatnot, and bring those out. But it's basically the vibrance of the image. Now, moving on to hue and saturation. This is basically just changing your color. So this does not mean that the color of the image is a cyan. It's saying that it's basically showing you down here that if I set this back to 0, the cyan will be cyan down here. But if you move this, the preview is at the bottom bar right here. So let's say that's about right there, right? These spokes or the brakes or whatever that is. I'm not good with cars, but somewhere around there. So if I change this to maybe like move this to 180, it will change those to around that color right there, which is actually that color right there. As you can see, where that is right there, where it used to be orange, now it's blue because of this preview down here. And it does that with all the color values. So this green grass right here, which is somewhere, I believe somewhere around here, it will actually be, it might be actually more down here, I'm not for sure. But if I change this, it will change it to a purple. So yeah, it is right here. It'll change that to more of a purple. It's very simple. And if you can mess with saturation, the same option that is in the vibrance, and the lightness, which is basically the brightness of it. Actually affects all the pixels, no matter the luminancy values or anything like that. And colorize, this is basically taking all the it's basically turning the whole image to black and white, but then adding color. You can increase the saturation or anything like that. So you can change it to red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple, red again, or anything like that. So basically that is it for hue saturation. Now if you move over to color balance, this is basically the balance of colors, but you see this check mark down here. It does say preserve luminancy, so it will preserve all those highlights and whatnot. But if we turn this off, you can see it's going to affect everything. Now, if you take a neutral color somewhere around here, like a gray, you may see this effect more. So I'm going to turn that back on. So you can see I'm going to increase the reds. The red values make the whole image more of a red tint. You can do that by using the option, or make it more cyan. Or you can make it more green or more magenta. Now this does vary uh, pertaining on your image that you're working on, and increase the blue or yellows. But that's basically what those do. You also go into shadows. You can mess with those as well. Those will affect your shadows or your highlights. So all the brighter values will be affected rather than your midtones or shadows. That's basically it for color balance. Now if you move over to black and white, this is basically just turning your image to black and white. You can also add a tint right here by selecting the color, but I don't want a tint. Now this is not saying to increase color, this is actually a brightness of the color. So if I want to increase the reds, I can increase those, brighten those up. As you can see, this was an orange color. If I can brighten those up, it will affect those bricks back here. That was up here. Those bricks were actually more of a reddish, so if I turn this up, you see that brightening up. You can see where this was more an orange-red. If I increase the brightness. And as you can see, this was more, it wasn't an absolute neutral color, it did have blue in it. So if I increase this, it brightens that up right there, and it creates some distortion. But, yeah. So you can do that with the magentas as well. Now that's basically the black and white adjustment. Now if you move over to photo filter, this is basically taking all the color values and pretty much, I wouldn't say color cast. I would say it's more of a filter, I believe. It's pretty much taking all the tones and making it a uh, cast of color. I wouldn't say it's color cast, but it's very similar to the concept. But you can do anything with this. If you want to kind of have some cool feeling in there, or like a more bluish type fill, you can add that. You see the difference. If you turn up preserve luminancy, it'll just affect everything. But if you keep that on, it will keep those highlights and whatnot. And that's basically it for the photo filter. I believe. Yep. And the next one on the list is channel mixer. So basically, you can either. I messed up on that. We go back to color mixer. Now you can output the channel to red, green, or blue, and there are presets as well. Now what you can do, this is basically the color balance, but it's more of a different approach. This is this is basically creating color cast. You really don't want that in an image, but this basically affects the red channel. That's what it's outputting it to right now. So it increases all those values. So if there's green values, I'm making them more red, as you can see. Where these were green, I can make them more red. But if I go over to the blue channel, if I make those green values more green, since it's red and green, or what am I saying? There is more like the red and blue values are actually mixing to make a magenta. But that's basically it. That's what's happening right here. If I take all this out and increase the red all the way, increase the blue all the way, you'll see it makes a magenta. And that's basically it for the channel mixer. And you can output those to RGB, all those channels. So next on the list is the color lookup. Now I'm going to be honest, I do not mess with this very often. This is actually the second time I opened it. Now this has a bunch of presets. You can load in some 3D LUT. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what this is. But there is different settings you can play around in here. Yeah, that kind of creates a cool thing. But that's basically what that's doing. It's affecting the colors in a certain way. Oops. Anyways, you can delete that. And the next on the list is the invert. This basically just inverts colors. There's no settings. This inverts all the colors to negative values. And posterize. This basically takes all the values and pretty much makes a general outline of where those colors are and whatnot. And you can either decrease that, and this does create banding, a lot of banding, depending on the levels. Increase the levels all the way, then it's going to do that. But it's pretty much saying all these colors, how many colors will be in the image, and you can pretty much decrease this, decrease it, press enter, and it will pretty much decrease it until it's not really color values of the image. It's basically just saying how many levels. Like as you can see, there's it's very limited and banding. If you get what I mean. I don't use that either. I don't find any use for it, but you might find use for it somehow. Now the threshold is basically just creating an outline of this. Now you can actually use this for sketching things or creating quick outlines of things, as such as this wheel, if it has a high contrast. So you can see the wheel coming in right there, and you can just mess with this, and it just pretty much creates takes the luminancy values and creates a solid shape, or not shapes, but outlines and stuff of these luminancy values and whatnot. So the lighter being white and the darker being black. I don't find any use for that except for some cases of creating some effects. You can go to selective color, and basically what this does, if you select the reds, this so if I select red, right, if I increase this, it will increase the cyan and the reds. As you can see, this is more red right here, and this is more of a neutralized color. If I increase the magentas, it's going to make it more magenta-y. It's not proper, but increase this, it's just going to put yellow in there, and then if you just increase black, it's just going to darken it just a little bit on the lighter areas. Turn absolute, then it will make it absolute, but you can do these for all the other colors. I don't find much use for that either, unless you're selecting colors such as these wheels and changing the color of that, or the color of that roof, or something like that. But that's basically selective color. It's selecting a color such as that that's isolated, and you can change the color of that without affecting anything else, like these values and whatnot in these areas. And the last one is gradient map. I use this a lot, actually, for like basically like photo filters. Don't get confused with the Photoshop adjustment. I'm saying just like a color correction. So there's presets in here that actually do a swell job of achieving what you're trying to get. So if I want more of like a warm feel, I can do that and decrease its opacity. And this does affect the luminancy values. So what this is saying is these are your shadows where this blue is. Actually, let me just bring that up. I'm sorry, it's actually inverted. So basically, these are your lighter values. These are your shadows. It's reversed from where is it? Where is it? Give me a second. No, I was right. I was right. I was right the first time. So these are your shadows and these are your highlights. Sorry about that. And pretty much right now it's just making it black and white because it's making all the shadows black and all the highlights white, and in the middle is neutral color, which is gray. It's just a grayscale. But if you add color, for example, it will make all of the, let me turn reverse off. It makes all the black values and shadows that bluish color, and then it fades into a little more like purplish, and then to like a orange, mixed with blue or something, more of a brown it seems, and more orange as the whites or highlights. That's basically simplified version of gradient map. And you also turn on dithering, so there is limited banding. At least Photoshop tries to do that. And that is basically it for the adjustments. I'm going to see if there is any more in here. There is some other options in here, such as shadows and highlights. You can increase the amount of shadows, which is actually what do you call it? It is basically just increasing it, like brightening it, I believe. That's what that does, but going to undo that. And if you, I believe there's more. There's HDR toning, and basically this is a I don't exactly remember the term. I might explain that in a different video because I completely forgot what the term is. I know what it does, but it's hard to explain. I'll explain it in the next video, possibly, maybe the video after that, because I might go over the effects in Photoshop in the next tutorial. That's basically it, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Uh, hope you guys enjoyed and get a overview of what the adjustments in Photoshop do. If you guys if you guys have any questions, then make sure to contact me or contact Reaper or just email us. I forgot to put the email in the last video, but I'll go edit that and put that in there so you guys can email us or do anything like that. You can also DM us on Twitter if needed. And if you enjoy this video, make sure to drop a like if you really want to. I'm just saying you don't have to. And you can maybe subscribe. Just a suggestion, just recommendation. But that is basically it, guys. This is Zapped, and this is Graphic Studios, and we're out.